Hi everyone, my name is Alex and I'm making a 2D platformer, tentatively called Caper Arcadia. And currently, it's a game about building and maintaining speed. I feel like it's a bit of a faux pas to say your own game has shmovement, but basically, I'm making a shmovement game, or at least, trying to. It's inspired by the classics, of course, Mario and Sonic and such, but also by games like Neon White and Celeste, secret paths, collectibles, time trial medals, and online leaderboards. Now, obviously, as you can see, the gameplay isn't quite there just yet, but I'm still in the prototyping phase, really trying to dig in and come up with cool mechanics and really find what the core gameplay loop is gonna be. This wasn't always the idea though. Originally, you're gonna play as a little Tomb Raider / mercenary guy, and your goal would be to find and steal the treasure in each level, making your escape as the clock runs out. Super inspired by the iconic intro sequence from Raiders of the Lost Ark. The twist would be, much like the scene from Raiders, that prior to nabbing your miscellaneous treasure, your MacGuffin if you will, not much danger would be present in the level. Instead, you could use the peace and quiet to explore, find secrets, and importantly, plot your escape route. I still think there's a cool idea in there somewhere, and I definitely plan to keep it in mind as I move forward with my prototype. As I've been chipping away at development though, I've started to move in the more movement-oriented direction. I love speedrunning, both literally, like I like watching speedruns, I like speedrunning games, but I also just like it as a concept. Specifically runs that showcase a player's expert route planning and mechanical ability. Think more Super Mario 64 and less Minecraft, where the emphasis is much more on game knowledge and executing on random opportunity. In short, I like games where you can get really good just by playing. I myself am nowhere near skilled enough to play stuff like Kaizo Super Mario, and I certainly don't intend for Caper Arcadia to be that challenging. When the difficulty is just right though, very hard for an average player, but something that still feels approachable, I've absolutely found myself grinding for hours to get a good time on a random Mario Maker or Neon White level, or more recently, to get a gold or author medal in Trackmania. Now, I'm no game dev expert, but having your project be something that you're personally excited to play seems pretty important to me, so I'm not really regretting this new direction. For this project, I'm using Unity, which I know is kind of a controversial decision these days, but let me explain. I've tried Godot, maybe not really given it a fair shot, but long enough to decide that, at least right now, it's not for me. It just has this overall veneer of jank permeating most of its features that I personally find super annoying. I know a lot of people can kind of look past that and instead focus on the ways in which it improves over Unity, but for whatever reason I just can't, and instead spent most of my time in Godot just wishing I was using Unity instead. I also have a bit of a thing with the whole FOSS equals good mentality that a lot of Godot evangelists subscribe to, but that's maybe a topic for another video. I'm also tired of being stuck in tutorial hell, as it's called, and I finally feel comfortable enough with Unity that I can design and implement pretty much anything I think of without much Googling, and this is really important for my motivation since I tend to get burnt out very quickly if I get stuck on a simple problem for a long time. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let me show you a bit of what I've been up to recently. This project really began, as most of my projects do, with me futzing about for weeks trying to implement a good character controller. I'm not totally sure what happened this time that let me really break through that barrier, but it definitely has something to do with its simplicity. In my Collide and Slide video, I started off by complaining about people who blindly push the practice of using dynamic rigid bodies for collision detection, and then applying forces for player movement. In my mind, this is a terrible idea. Using add force to make your character walk forward feels akin to pushing a car from behind rather than sitting and driving at the steering wheel. But there's no denying that having all the collisions handled for us is extremely useful, and they even trigger collision events that we can hook into inside of our scripts. So, at least for this project, I said fuck it, and decided that the ideal system would be some Frankenstein of built-in and custom physics, which is basically exactly what I've ended up with. And ironically, it's far more simple and stable than any of the shitty kinematic controllers I've tried cooking up in the past. The way I've gone about this is by controlling the rigid body's velocity directly rather than using forces, at least for direct player movement. My ideal character controller is kind of a black box with a couple external inputs. Other scripts shouldn't have to care about any direct implementation details. And I don't think I quite achieved that with this controller, but it's easily the closest I've gotten, and so far I enjoy working with it, so that's good. The core of my controller, I guess you could say, is this ground speed variable, which keeps track of how fast the player should be going horizontally, but allows for easy implementation of stuff like slopes. Ground speed can be affected externally using this move function, which uses some simple rules to determine whether the controller should be accelerating or decelerating for the current frame. There's a bunch of other stuff in here as well that's all pretty self-explanatory, so I won't go over it here, but let me know in the comments if you have any specific questions. To drive this controller and implement all of my fancy gameplay features, I'm using a finite state machine for the player that I originally ripped from this YouTube tutorial a few years ago and have been reusing and kind of remixing ever since. It's pretty straightforward. Each state has enter and exit functions that get called when the state changes, and then define rules for which state to change to and when. Each state can also have its own code for things like playing audio or detecting enemies to stomp on, because they have references to all the important scripts like the player and character controller. The most recent big thing I've worked on is a custom sprite animation system to completely circumvent Unity's built-in animation system, which was turning into an utterly indecipherable web of transition rules, even at this early point in the project. I wanted something that would be exclusively defined and controlled through code, and then driven by my pre-existing state machine. Before, there were essentially two state machines that I was trying to keep in sync, but now I only have to worry about one. I utilized Unity's scriptable objects to create my own animation clips that I could then attach to a sprite animator component on objects that need to be animated. Each clip can define its own frame rate, whether or not it loops, which clip to transition to by default, if any, and each frame has a duration and event field. The events are a list of key value pairs that get added to the sprite animator component on a per object basis. Currently they're just named with strings, which may not be the best approach, but I think for such a small project it'll be fine. And honestly, it's very convenient either way. So yeah, for example, that lets me destroy each of these bricks by calling the kill event on the last frame, which then triggers this function inside the breakable script. If you found any of that interesting, I hope you'll consider subscribing and following along as I hopefully turn this prototype into something more substantial. I'm currently aiming for monthly updates. Of course, if you have any ideas for the game or specific aspects of development you'd like to hear about, let me know in the comments down below. That's all for this video. Thanks for taking the time to check out my little game idea, and again, I hope you'll consider subscribing and following along. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.